Pro tip that I give people, don't film with a window behind you, it's going to make your footage look really bad. That said, who cares about this really? So today's been marginally interesting. In my previous life, and still in some respect, I've spent a lot of time setting up my work environment, specifically inside of a computer, that environment, not this physical space, although that is important, maybe talk about that later. So previously I would work inside of an IDE, and I would spend, or have spent in the past, a reasonable amount of time setting that up so that it worked and functioned in the way that I wanted it to work and was most productive for myself. Now, when I was first getting into editing and producing content, I spent a significant amount of time figuring out my own workflow. It may not be the best workflow, but it was a workflow that worked for me. As I came into this role professionally, I was kind of thrown in at the deep end, going from one thing to the next. I didn't actually have time to set up my software environment in a way that was conducive to myself. So today, I've actually managed to carve out a little bit of time to set up my work environment, specifically in Premiere. Now, I should have done this a long time ago. I had done it when I was first learning Premiere Pro and to some extent After Effects, but predominantly in Premiere Pro. So whilst having a defined project structure in a hierarchical folded view for each self-contained project, I found it very useful to have defined workspaces inside of Premiere. Now, there is a whole wodge of default workspaces there that kind of give you an idea of what you can do. However, for me, they didn't fit my specific style of wanting to work. So today, that's what I've done. I've spent a few hours getting each workspace set up how I would want, with the tools in place that I use at a specific time, which then maps quite neatly onto my project workspaces on how I have those, the actual workflow of producing a bit of content. I've tried to extrapolate that away a little bit so that it's not just limited to Premiere Pro, so that certainly for video production, there's pretty much a one-to-one synergy between steps in the workflow and a workspace, be that editing, assembly, like referencing, putting in captions, that kind of thing, as to how that would go with an individual asset inside of that project workflow. So I think there's some utility there if anybody is kind of watching these videos with any sort of understanding of how to build content projects from almost a project management perspective. I'd be really interested in having a chat about how you go about doing that, and if there's some synergy between how you structure the physical and how you structure your workspaces, because that is something that I've not read much about, and I don't think there's very much out there to map those two things together. So that's been an interesting one for me today. Certainly, it's in line with what I'm doing both personally and professionally, and it's been really useful actually to get into the nuances of the Creative Cloud and figure out how I can tie bits of data that I didn't know were actually exposed in Premiere, and how I can get that back to the data source that I'm using. So we do a lot with SharePoint workflows, and I've written quite a robust management workflow that goes through various stages in SharePoint for different roles inside of my day job. And I can expose some of that data inside Premiere Pro. Actually can expose it inside of Media Manager, which is a component in Premiere Pro and After Effects and Bridge, and perhaps in Photoshop. I don't know too much about the Photoshop side of things in Illustrator, but it'd be interesting to see if that is in there. I will have a look at that. And that's been really good because you can actually create your own data fields in there. So if you've got content tagged with something, you can expose it inside of one of those apps and then do things with it, which is really, really good, because part of what I had been doing was looking at automatically generating certain bits of content. I have talked about this previously, based off of certain data sets. And I had quite a complex method of doing that, but it seems like I might be able to feed some of that directly into Premiere from this. So that's all come about from me messing this morning with setting up my workspaces. It'd have been really good to have had time to have done that when I first came into this post, but you know, it's a means to an end, isn't it? Sometimes you don't have that, you've got to hit the ground running, and it was a case of get stuff done. So this has been super useful in that respect. Right, I'm going to leave it there for today and head on home. So yeah, until later, have a good one. I will see you tomorrow. Be nice to each other.